If she went quiet, if the messages stopped, if it feels like you disappeared from her world, listen carefully. Silence is not absence. Silence is where unfinished emotions hide. And the truth no one ever told you is this: when a woman truly disconnects, she doesn't go silent. She goes indifferent. Silence is something else entirely. Here's what's really happening in her mind while you're trying to convince yourself she's over it. She remembers you in moments you'll never see. Not the big ones, the small, dangerous ones. The way you said her name when no one else was around. The tone you used when you were calm and certain. The version of you that made her feel something she hasn't been able to recreate since. That's the part that stays. Women don't think about men the way men think about women. Men replay events. Women replay feelings. And feelings don't disappear just because communication stops. They disappear only when they are replaced by something stronger. And here's the uncomfortable reality. If she's silent, it's often because nothing has replaced you yet. Silence is not peace. Silence is control. It's her trying to regain emotional balance without reopening a door she's scared to walk through again. Because when she thinks about you, it's not neutral. It costs her something. It pulls her back into a version of herself that felt alive, vulnerable, and exposed. And that's dangerous. She still thinks about you late at night, not because she wants you back, but because her nervous system remembers you. You became familiar, predictable in a world where most men are chaotic, uncertain, or fake. Familiarity creates safety, and safety creates attachment. That bond doesn't break just because a conversation ended. Here's the truth men are never told. Closure is mostly a myth, especially for women. They don't need answers to move on. They need emotional resolution. And if something ended without that resolution, the mind keeps the loop open. That loop replays when she's alone, when someone new disappoints her, when she realizes she's laughing less than she used to. And this is where ego lies to you. You think if she cared, she'd reach out. But silence doesn't mean she doesn't care. Silence often means she cares too much to risk feeling powerless again. Reaching out would put her in a position where she could be rejected, ignored, or exposed. And women are far more protective of their emotional dignity than men realize. So she stays silent, not because you're forgotten, but because you're unresolved. She notices when you post. She notices when you don't. She wonders if you've changed, or if you're still the same man she remembers. And here's the part that hits hardest. The version of you she thinks about isn't the one you were at the end. It's the version of you at your best. Confident, present, grounded. The man who made her feel chosen without begging. That memory doesn't fade easily. It fades only when she convinces herself that version of you is gone. And until she fully believes that, a part of her mind keeps checking the door, quietly, privately, in ways you'll never see. This is why silence should never be mistaken for closure. Silence is where emotions go to survive without being seen. Here's the part that changes how you see everything. She doesn't think about you when she's busy. She thinks about you when something fails to make her feel the way you once did. When a conversation feels empty. When a laugh doesn't land. When a new man does everything right and still doesn't touch the same emotional nerve. That's when you appear, uninvited. Women don't miss men. They miss how they felt inside themselves around that man. And if you activated a version of her that felt more confident, more feminine, more seen, then you became a reference point. Every future connection is unconsciously compared to you. Not logically, nervously, emotionally, instinctively. This is why time alone doesn't erase you. Time only dulls details. Feelings live deeper than memory. They attach to identity. And when she's silent, she's often trying to protect a new identity she's building, one where she doesn't depend on how you made her feel. But that identity isn't fully stable yet, so your presence lingers like a pressure in the background. Here's what men misunderstand. If she's not reaching out, it's not because she's strong. It's because she's resisting the urge to test whether you still have the same effect on her. Because if she reaches out and feels nothing, it confirms loss. But if she reaches out and feels everything again, it reopens a wound she worked hard to close, so she chooses silence over certainty. And silence lets her imagine you without risking reality. In her mind, you remain controlled, frozen, unchanging. She can revisit you without losing ground. That's why she may stalk quietly, check updates, or ask mutual connections indirect questions, not because she wants to come back, but because she needs to know if you're still there. This is where most men ruin everything without realizing it. They mistake silence as a signal to chase, explain, confess, or prove. But emotional gravity doesn't respond to effort, it responds to contrast. The more stable, grounded, and unaffected you appear, the more her mind fills in the gaps. Mystery feeds memory. Desperation kills it. Another truth most men can't handle. Sometimes she stays silent because she's afraid you've changed. If you've grown calmer, stronger, less reactive, you represent a version of the past she can't control anymore. That creates anxiety, because the man she remembers was emotionally accessible. The man she fears now might be unavailable, and that reversal flips the power dynamic. So instead of reaching out, she waits, she watches, she tells herself she doesn't care, while her body reacts when your name crosses her screen. Silence becomes a strategy to keep emotional balance while still holding on to a connection that exists only in her mind. And here's the sharpest truth. Women rarely miss what they can still get. They miss what they're no longer sure they can access. Uncertainty keeps desire alive. Not distance alone, uncertainty. If she knew with certainty that you would respond instantly, explain everything, and welcome her back emotionally, the mystery would die. But if she senses that you've moved into a state where you don't need validation, don't chase closure, and don't collapse into old patterns, that's when thinking turns into tension. So when she's silent, don't imagine emptiness, imagine friction. Imagine a quiet internal argument between curiosity and self-protection, between memory and pride, between the version of herself she was with you and the version she's trying to become without you. Silence is not peace. Silence is restraint. There's a moment that happens in her mind that no one talks about. It's the moment she realizes she can't rewrite the story the way she wants. She's replayed it in her head 100 times. What she should have said, how she could have handled it differently, how things might have turned out if emotions hadn't taken over, and every time, the ending still leads back to you being significant. That's when thinking about you stops being nostalgic and starts being uncomfortable, because unresolved connection creates cognitive dissonance. Part of her wants to move forward cleanly. Another part knows the bond wasn't shallow. And when those two parts collide, the brain looks for relief. Silence becomes that relief. It allows her to pause the conflict without resolving it. Here's what matters. Women don't detach emotionally all at once. They detach in layers. Behavior first, words second, feelings last. Just because the behavior ended doesn't mean the emotional layer ever closed, especially if the connection challenged her, grounded her, or exposed parts of herself she usually keeps hidden. If you were the man who didn't over-explain, who didn't chase validation, who could sit in silence without panicking, you left a deeper imprint than you realize. That kind of masculine calm disrupts her internal patterns. It makes her feel something she can't easily rationalize. And what can't be rationalized gets revisited. This is why certain triggers bring you back into her mind without warning. A smell, a place, a phrase someone else uses that reminds her of you. The nervous system doesn't forget familiarity. It flags it as important, not safe, important. And important things are monitored, not discarded. She may tell herself she's healed, she may even believe it most days, but healing isn't about forgetting, it's about integration. And if she hasn't fully integrated what you represented in her emotional life, the thought of you resurfaces, not as longing, but as tension. Here's the part most men misinterpret. Her silence is not waiting for you to make a move. It's waiting for clarity inside herself. If she reaches out, she has to confront what you still mean. And that's risky, because if you no longer respond the way you used to, it confirms a loss she hasn't emotionally accepted yet. So she stays quiet. She observes. She lets time do the work she's not ready to do consciously. And this is where power subtly shifts. The man who understands this doesn't rush. He doesn't post for attention. He doesn't send indirect signals. He doesn't try to be remembered. He becomes grounded. predictable in his growth, stable in his direction. And that stability creates contrast against her internal uncertainty. Here's a truth that stings. Women don't obsess over men who need them. They obsess over men who were solid without them. If you were emotionally centered, self-directed, and calm under pressure, you became a reference point for what grounded masculinity feels like. And once that reference exists, it doesn't disappear. She might date, she might smile, she might even fall into something new. But when that new connection lacks depth or direction, her mind quietly returns to the last place it felt anchored. Not because she wants to go back, but because her nervous system recognizes a standard. And standards don't vanish. They reshape desire. So if you ever wonder why silence feels heavy instead of empty, this is why. Silence isn't absence, it's compression. It's emotion held in place because releasing it would force a decision she's not ready to make. And as long as that decision remains unmade, a part of her mind stays exactly where you left it. Here's where the truth turns uncomfortable, because it's not about romance anymore. It's about identity. When a woman thinks about you long after silence sets in, it's rarely because she wants the relationship back exactly as it was. It's because you became part of how she understands herself. And losing that reflection creates instability she doesn't talk about. You didn't just exist in her life, you shaped her emotional self-image. Around you, she learned how she responds to certainty, how she reacts to calm pressure, how it feels to be desired without being chased. That version of herself felt real, and when you're gone, she's left trying to recreate that feeling without the source that unlocked it. This is why silence isn't relief. It's containment. She's trying to keep the memory from bleeding into her present decisions, because if she lets herself feel it fully, she has to confront a question she's been avoiding. Why hasn't anyone else made me feel this grounded? That question threatens the narrative she tells herself to move on. So instead, she reframes, she minimizes, she tells herself it wasn't that deep, that it was timing, circumstances, distance, anything except significance. But the body doesn't listen to explanations, it listens to patterns. And when the pattern breaks, it looks backward for reference. You become that reference. Here's what most men don't realize. Emotional impact ages differently for women. Initial attraction fades quickly. Emotional safety doesn't. The longer time passes, the more clearly she can separate noise from substance. And often, distance clarifies what proximity confused. What felt ordinary when it was available becomes rare once it's gone. This is why silence sometimes intensifies thinking instead of reducing it. And here's where ego can sabotage you if you're not careful. If you assume her silence means she holds power, you'll be tempted to react, to prove you're okay, to signal value, to manufacture indifference. But real leverage isn't performed, it's embodied. The man who truly moves forward doesn't try to look unaffected, he simply is. That state is deeply unsettling to someone who still carries emotional residue, because when you don't reach out, don't provoke, don't collapse, and don't seek reassurance, her mind has no new data to work with. It can't downgrade you. It can't rewrite you. You remain undefined, and undefined things occupy more mental space than resolved ones. This isn't about manipulation. It's about natural psychological tension. The mind seeks closure, but closure requires interaction, and interaction requires vulnerability. If she's not ready to be vulnerable, she chooses silence and pays the price internally. You may never hear from her. That's important to accept. Thinking about you doesn't guarantee action, but it does mean something unfinished exists, and unfinished things pull attention, energy, and emotional bandwidth, sometimes for years. Here's the hardest truth to swallow. You don't need to do anything to stay in her mind. The moment you try to control the outcome, you reduce the impact. Presence comes from who you were, not what you do afterward. And if you continue building a life that doesn't revolve around being remembered, you paradoxically become harder to forget. Not because you disappear, but because you no longer chase resolution. Silence keeps her suspended between past meaning and present uncertainty. And that tension only resolves when one of two things happens. She emotionally integrates what you represented, or she risks reaching out and facing the reality she's been avoiding. Until then, the quiet stays loud, and you remain exactly where unresolved truths live, just beneath the surface. Now listen closely, because this is where everything comes together, and where most men finally misunderstand their role in all of this. The real reason she still thinks about you isn't because you're special in the way movies sell romance. It's because you disrupted her emotional predictability. You broke a pattern she didn't even know she had. Most people repeat emotional loops. Same attraction, same disappointment, same ending. You didn't just enter her life, you interrupted that loop. And the mind never fully releases interruptions. It studies them. It revisits them. It asks why. That's why even in silence, you exist as a question mark in her mind. She wonders what it would feel like to talk to you now. Not because she wants reassurance, but because she senses you're no longer the same man. Growth changes energy. And energy is what women respond to more than words, more than history, more than promises. If you've stopped chasing understanding, if you've stopped needing validation, if you've accepted not being chosen and continued forward anyway, you've stepped into a psychological position most men never reach, and that position is rare. Rare things are remembered. Here's the part that frees you. Her thinking about you is not your responsibility. It's a byproduct, a consequence of how you showed up when it mattered. You don't need to trigger it. You don't need to maintain it. You don't need to win anything. The man who truly leaves an imprint is the man who doesn't linger emotionally after leaving physically. And here's the quiet irony. The moment you stop caring whether she thinks about you, that's usually when she feels it most. Because detachment isn't coldness, it's wholeness. It signals that you've integrated the experience instead of being defined by it. Women feel that shift even from a distance. She might never reach out, or she might one day send a message that seems casual but carries weight you can feel instantly. Either way, the outcome doesn't define you anymore, and that's the real power, because the deepest psychological pull isn't created by availability or effort. It's created by emotional self-sufficiency. When a man is grounded in his direction, his silence isn't absence, it's presence without demand. That's why she still thinks about you. Not because she's weak, not because she's confused, but because you represented a version of connection that didn't require performance, only authenticity. And once someone experiences that, their mind doesn't erase it. It files it away as reference, as standard, as something to measure against. So if you're watching this wondering whether silence means you've been forgotten, understand this. Forgetting is easy, integration is hard, and hard things take time. Now here's what I want you to do. In the comments, answer this honestly. Do you believe silence means disinterest or unresolved emotion? If this hit something real inside you, like the video. Subscribe if you want deeper truths most people never say out loud, and share this with a friend who's stuck in silence and needs clarity, not comfort, because the truth changes everything.